Hey everybody, Mr. Dustin here. Welcome to Bible class once again. Today, we're going to be talking about where Abraham, where did he come from? And if you remember, at the very beginning of our story, Genesis, the end of chapter 11, they left a place called Ur of the Chaldeans. I think it's always important and really many times fascinating to know, where do people come from and how does that influence them? So today, that's what we're going to talk about, so let's get to it. As we begin, I'm going to put a map on the screen and I want to show you on the map where Ur of the Chaldeans is. Now you'll see the little journey route of Abraham. And what you can see there is, I want to point out to you first, Mount Ararat. If you remember, that's where the ark came to rest. It is near on this map where you see the label for the Tigris River just under the city of Nineveh. Right in that area there is northern modern day Turkey. That's somewhere close to where Mount Ararat is. Now, after Noah left the ark, his descendants, they all migrated back down into the Mesopotamian plains, which is just south from that area there. And you see the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Because those rivers were there, the water helped to fertilize the soil and it watered the soil. It was a great place to be able to irrigate the land and to be able to have good productive crops, wheat, sesame, flax, things like this, fruits and vegetables. And so, as a result of water and being able to grow and farm, there was a prosperous city that began to develop there called Ur, or Ur, I think is the proper pronunciation of it. So Ur, whenever you look at it, it's on the south end of the Euphrates River. It's very close to where the Euphrates and the Tigris River come together. This site of the ancient city of Ur is located about 140 miles south of Babylon. And Ur's ruins, which means now if we were to go look for it, you would find the ruins of a city. They're fairly close to modern day Baghdad, Iraq. And they're between that and the Persian Gulf, if I understand correctly. So in this city, a man named Terah and his 3 sons lived. It was really, apparently, from what I understand, quite a magnificent city and a place where a lot of highly educated people were living. And that is where Terah, the father of Abraham, lived. It's interesting because he's the father of an entire Jewish nation, Abraham is. So we know that Abraham, was born somewhere close to 4,000 years ago. We guesstimate somewhere around 2100 BC. Now, if you remember, BC means before Christ. So on a timeline, I'll see if I can put one up for you to look at it. If we have Jesus' birth, and then we go back 2,000 years before that, we are now 2,000 years after that. But 2,000 years before that is about when Abraham lived and when he was born. How do we know that? Well, as best as we can tell, there are historians and archaeologists who have done some research and they have dug up some of these places and they've found artifacts and various things that they're able to put a date on that they say this is sometime around where Abraham lived. So that's kind of how we are able to know now, about 2100 years before Christ was born, Abraham lived because of archaeology. So this was a very cultured and prosperous city, Ur. It had a large library of cuneiform tablets. I'm going to put a picture of one of them here. You probably remember whenever we were talking about cuneiform writing, we wrote with the sticks and Play-Doh. And because Abraham's family was probably wealthy, it's very likely that he was a well-educated individual. Now, in Abraham's day, I think this is interesting, kind of the culture of the time. Men living in those cities would usually wear something that almost was like a skirt. If you've ever seen a Scottish kilt, that's a fair comparison, where it would just be something that was wrapped around your waist, and that was almost it. Whenever they would go around, they would be dressed, with no shirt. Men would go around like this. This is how they would go to school or conduct business in that city. However, if you were a wealthy shepherd, this would be Abraham. Whenever we follow his life, he becomes a wealthy shepherd. They would wear long robes that would really help cover their body and protect them from the sun, because the sun can beat down on you. And the women of the time, they also wore gowns that covered literally from their shoulders down to their ankles. And apparently, both men and women would wear beautiful gold and silver bracelets and earrings and necklaces. Women actually had usually long hair and would wear these elaborate headdresses that were in their hair. I'll actually put a picture of one here. Apparently, archaeologists have unearthed some very exquisite, beautiful examples of these golden headdresses. And this picture, I think, is a recreation of those things, more than it is one that they actually found. An interesting thing about the city of Ur that's different than what we have today: money, dollars. Like we have paper money, I could have a dollar bill or coins. They didn't use money like that to buy goods and services. Instead, they had what we call a barter system, where you would trade things. And maybe I would bring you sheep and you would give me, some of your crops. I don't know, whatever it would be, we would trade things instead of having a money or a currency. It's kind of an interesting way of going about things. But the religion piece, this is important because this is where Abraham came from. And it's interesting to know what Abraham became. So, to God's sorrow, the religion in the time, after the days of the flood, whenever the people were getting back populated on the earth, many of those people went back to the sinful ways of before. The Mesopotamian people, which is just that region there, they began to believe in many what we would call pagan gods, and they built these huge step temples we've talked about before called ziggurats. If you remember the Tower of Babel, we believe the Tower of Babel to have been a ziggurat, where it has the steps up and a ramp leading to the top. In fact, there was a great ziggurat of the town or the city of Ur, and a lot of that is still standing today. Here's a picture of it so you can see this is what those people built to worship their gods and goddesses. And those gods and goddesses of Mesopotamia were not like the living God, El Shaddai, El Elyon, the God that we know and serve. They were not all loving, they were not all knowing, and they were not all present. In fact, the people of the time believed that those ancient gods looked and acted just like they did, like people. And according to their mythology, and emphasize mythology means it's a myth, it's not true. Those gods, they thought, could marry and they could have children. They could be kind or they could be angry. They might even fight with each other. And they also believed that the gods could be very annoyed with people, humanity, and that they would punish them, or maybe they would be very pleased with them and reward them. But since so many people in Abraham's hometown, where he came from, believed in these many, many gods, Abraham's faith, if you remember the faith, what is faith? Hebrews 11:1. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. So his faith in the one true God, the living God, it demonstrates what a remarkable and really unusual person that he was. Because amidst all of that stuff, Abraham had faith in the true God. But what kind of homes and things did they live in? Apparently, the wealthy inhabitants of the rich city of Ur lived in large 12 to 14 room villas, small towns, if you will, built within a city. They were made of mud brick. Many of these villas apparently even had indoor plumbing, complete with bathrooms, which would be a very rare thing at the time. Poorer people who didn't have as much money, lived in 1 or 2 room, they would have a flat roof, mud brick homes. So I want to show you, this is a picture that is virtually reconstructed of what Ur may have looked like. And you can see this big city complex. I think it's neat to see because you get an idea of what kind of construction was that. What did the people live in? And Abraham's family may have owned, a section of this, or maybe they at least lived in one of the huts or something there, or at least something like it. But it's interesting because they were shepherds. They had many flocks, and so they didn't spend all their time living in the city. They lived in tents as they would go around with their herds and their flocks. An interesting discovery was made in the 1920s. The archaeologists were digging at this ancient site of Ur, and they found a very interesting discovery. Carefully excavating a burial site, in other words, a tomb, they came upon many rich tombs within this whole burial site from long ago. So here are a few pictures from those burial sites. You'll see there's a headdress, I think, is in there. You'll see a picture of a lyre, a golden lyre. It's an instrument that would be played. Many things that they have. But from those tombs, the contents tell us a lot about what we now know about the city of Ur. The women apparently carried purses. They would maybe wear makeup, and usually they carried long daggers in their purses. But this is interesting. This is actually a mystery that the people came across in one queen's tomb. I'm going to read this and give you the clues, and then I want you to pause, take a guess, maybe what happened, and then I'll tell you the solution, and you can see if you got it right. So in the passageway to this queen's underground tomb, apparently there lay skeletons of guards with daggers and dozens of women adorned with elaborate headdresses and jewelry. They all lay neatly and peacefully with cups nearby, with no signs of struggle. How did they die? And why were they buried this way? So if you want to go back, play those clues again, listen to it one more time, and then pause and guess. And then whenever we come back, I'll tell you the answer, and you can see if you got it right. So the key to this mystery of why so many well-dressed people and guards lay in rows in front of the queen's tomb was the cup that was nearby. Apparently, each cup had poison in it beside each of these bodies. The ancient Mesopotamians, those people that lived in Ur, they believed that a ruler, like a queen, must take servants and helpers with them to the afterlife, as they would call it, so that they could help them, so that they could serve their dead queen in the next world. It's kind of interesting to think about. So that is where Abraham came from. This culture of people that believed in many gods, and they believed in this idea of having such loyalty to their queens that they believed we have to die with the queen so that we can serve her in the next life. That is where Abraham came from. And we know that when he was 75, he was called to go to a place he did not know. So for 75 years, this was the culture that he was around. And nevertheless, he was faithful to the one true God. Makes him kind of an unusual person of the time. So that's where he's from. Now on Wednesday, we're going to follow along the map that I showed you earlier and see where all did Abraham go in his life and maybe some of the things that happened in his life. So I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. I hope that it was interesting to you to learn about where did Abraham come from. I'll see you then.